Happy Friday, everyone, and welcome to this week's edition of Drumversations. We missed you last week. We were dropping our daughter off at Penn State and going through all of that crazy. There was a huge freshman party at one of the freshman dorms, and within 24 hours of that party, there was a petition with over 2,000 signatures to send the freshmen home. So we had our own drama happening last week, and we're happy to be back on schedule this week, speaking to you all about what's going on in the world and how we're thinking about moving us forward. Speaking of that, today I wanted to talk about moving the country forward in times of intense polarization through a politics of humanity. So over the last couple of weeks, we have had the Democratic convention and we've had the Republican convention. And, you know, I wanted to know now, what about the people, we the people? What is it that we want, and how can we craft a vision of unity and togetherness in a way that moves us forward to make America what it could be, make it great for the first time, right? Not again, but one that's truly inclusive, equitable for everyone who is here. But always we have to start with breathing, right? We breathe in and out. We breathe in all the goodness the universe has for us, and we breathe out all the crazy anxiety, all the silliness, all the foolishness that tries to keep us off center, right? Breathe in and center, breathe out. Breathe in. This creates that virtual synchronicity we've talked about, creating community even over the internet, and breathe out. And as we breathe in, remember who you are. Remember your ancestors. Breathe out. Put those ancestors in the chat, and we will call them out here after we play the ancestral drum call. Cool. All right. We honor all the ancestors who have made an impact on us in the world, who have made an impact on us directly. I call on my grandfather, Charles Fisher Goins, my other grandfather, Frank Lomax Jr., Verna Mae Lomax, my grandmother, Aunt Norma, Max Roach, Elvin Jones, John Coltrane, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, Audre Lorde, Shirley Chisholm, all kind of and manner of folks who have made an impact, not just on me, but on the world. We say ashe. So today, I wanted to talk about how we move the country forward based on what we heard from the DNC and RNC. I don't think we heard what we need from either wing of this same bird, right? We want to make these big distinctions between left and right, conservative and liberal, but really they're different wings of the same bird. So they're all really working to occupy or hold power, which may or may not be in the interest of we the people. As is custom in American politics, the object is to best a party in a political contest to hold power or rule for 4 years, like I said, as opposed to really making sure that the people's voice is being heard. How do I know that? Because there is the vote, there's the semblance of democracy, but as we know from some research from Yale and others over the last 10 years, America may not ever have been a real democracy because of the Electoral College, right? As an example, Trump lost the popular vote, the voice of the people, but won the Electoral College, which means the economic elite always have the final say in who leads the country. This begs the question, what is actually what the people want, right? As in, how can all of the human beings in America that has a collective interest in the best interest of all of us get what we need to be our best selves and to make this country the best place it possibly can be for all of us, right? It's a known fact, and we've addressed this on previous episodes of Drumversations, that America wasn't really built for everyone, right? The founding fathers were exactly that. They were men. There were no women in the room. Not only were they men, they were white men who were at that time the economic elite, or the 1% of that time, many of whom owned slaves or made their significant wealth based on the slave-based economy, right? So there were no poor white men, or what we would call now white working class, and there obviously were no people of African descent who were at that time enslaved. So the construct of America from its very beginnings was created on a premise that worked best for the men that were in the room where it happened, right? And there were so many more people that weren't there, and as a result of not being there, they were not represented. The we the people then that Jefferson so eloquently wrote about is problematic, right? How did they define we? Was it the collective we that the egalitarian language of the Declaration of Independence and other founding documents espouses? Or was it we, those folks who were in the room, those wealthy white men who did not think we was inclusive of their wives, let alone their daughters or aunties or their maidservants or their women slaves or any other women that would be in the country, or let alone the men, whether they be black or poor white, right? We is a very specific thing from the perception of the people who were in that room. Whereas in the modern context, especially since King and the 20th century civil rights movement, we, the people, may have expanded that concept and that construct of we to be more inclusive, right? So the whole notion of the American dream then may have been put in place based on that very small idea of we, meaning small, the economic elite. The dream may have been put in place to really keep the rest of us from achieving that level of we, right? If you're dreaming about success as defined by other people, primarily in America, materialism, then it makes it more difficult to see your competitors, people who are competing for the crumbs or the lack of resources at certain levels of society, as your partners. Right? This is why folks like Fred Hampton were assassinated. Fred was in Chicago working on behalf of the Black Panthers, but he was working to pull the black and brown people and the poor white farmers in rural Illinois together into one political class, right? And they shot him in his bed as he was sleeping next to his pregnant partner, right? Only because, now he never carried a gun, he never shot a gun to the knowledge that I have and the research that I've done, documentaries, books, and the like. But what made him dangerous is that he was uniting, quote unquote, the lower economic classes of Illinois. The poor white folks, poor black people, and brown people who were all experiencing economic and other forms of oppression and repression. That made him dangerous because that we the people, as written and agreed upon by the founding fathers, is very narrow, right? Fred Hammond and others like him were trying to broaden that we into us, right? How do we make America work for all of us is really the question. You know, how do we make it work for human beings? We have to learn to practice a politics of humanity. Practicing a politics of humanity really establishes an egalitarian framework that enhances our collective humanity to forge a real cultural, political, and national identity rooted in the best of who we are. What does that mean? It means that our differences are our strength, right? And the fact that we are all human beings is the thing that brings us together, right? So as a human being, I happen to be of African descent. I also happen to be a musician. But I am not a good accountant. So if you happen to be of a different ethnicity and you have skills with numbers and you can be my accountant, then together we are working to make whatever it is we are agreeing upon to do better, right? I can't do everything. The accountant doesn't play the drums, but can handle the money. As an example of just how we work together. And then another example is just the band that I have, right? I'm a drummer. I'm not a piano player. I'm not going to tell the pianist what to do. I'm not going to tell the saxophone player what to do or the bassist. We all have done our work, and we all have agreed to work together to make music as best as we can together, right? If I try to tell the piano player how to play the piano, then I could be not only infringing upon his creative ability to do what he does, but I would be putting constraints and limits on him, which would make the product that we create together not as good as it would be if he felt free to be himself. Right? A politics of humanity really leverages our optimal capacity to be our best. And by being your best, it encourages me to be my best. What would the country be like if that's how we framed our political discourse? It's a broad statement, and given our current political and social strife and conflict, you know, it might seem overly idealistic, but given all of the recent events, the political conventions, the police shootings, and everything else that's happened since we last spoke 2 weeks ago, I have been really struggling with how we get to a point where these issues are no longer the norm. And the only thing I can really come up with is we have to shift our culture. And by shifting the culture, we shift the way we engage each other. And by shifting the way we engage each other, we shift the way our policies work, our politics work, so we can create a set of policies, practices, procedures, laws, everything else in the American construct that really does benefit all of us. Right? Not at the expense of one group versus another, but all of us, right? America is one of the wealthiest, if not the wealthiest country in the world. There's no reason that we should have poverty. There's no reason that someone who's a billionaire should think that in order to make sure that other people eat, they have to give up something, right? Fundamentally, if we practice a politics of humanity, that means my wealth is not just mine alone, right? I have the ability to earn a living and be comfortable, but I also have a responsibility to my fellow human beings to ensure that they have equitable access to opportunities, right? It takes competition out of it in a way that allows us to add value to our families and ourselves, and add value by extension to the community and to the collective humanity that creates what America could be, right? For the sake of time, because it is a lot, it's broad, it has a lot of details and things that could go into what an actual politics of humanity could be and could realize as a result of that. I want to focus on three things. I want to focus on the culture shift from where we are today to an egalitarianism that allows us to all be our best selves. So a culture shift toward egalitarianism. I want to focus on redefining education that allows that culture shift to happen. And then I want to focus on adding value. But I think I'm just trying to make sure I'm being as clear as possible. The value add is what we, because we're able to be our optimal selves, bring to the table to make the country better, right? So it's our personal and collective responsibility. So a few definitions. Whenever I use the word egalitarianism or egalitarian, people are like, well, we have equity and we have equality. Why do we need egalitarianism? Well, we need egalitarianism because it is the foundational value that everyone is equal. And if we really do believe that, then we have to understand that before we get to equality, we have to deal with equity, right? There's 400 years of inequality. So before we get to equality, we have to correct that, and then we can move forward, right? So egalitarianism allows us to say, I value you as much as I value myself. And because we understand this history that America has since 1619, then we have to do what we can to make sure that everybody has equal footing. There's a lot of work to get there. But if we don't first ascribe to egalitarian values, then we'll never get to that equality that we all talk about, right? Politics. We all know what it is because we deal with it, we live it. But for the sake of conversation, I wanted to define it as activities associated with the governance of a country or area, especially the debate or conflict among individuals or parties around who is either hoping to achieve or who actually has power. Right? That's why the definition is important because politics is not just a conversation or debate about anything. It's a conversation and or debate about power. Who has it and to what extent they have it and for how long they have it. Right? To quote or to paraphrase my favorite slave owner, Thomas Jefferson, in the event that a government does not do what it must to ensure that all people have what they need, those people, it is incumbent upon them to shift, change, reimagine that government, right? He has a quote that says something to the effect that, rebellion is God's work. Those are not his exact words, I'm paraphrasing, but he's saying that it's incumbent upon the people to be free. And that is what God wants for us in his framework, right? Which is interesting, of course, because he was a slave owner. But that doesn't mean that what he's saying is not true, right? So if we're reimagining the country and how we deal with politics from a humane perspective, that means the power rests literally in the hands of the people, and that those who we elect, I'm basing this on the construct that we already have and live in. If we elect people to then kind of manage resources and manage all of the other things that make that society happen, they also are managing and they understand that they have been given authority by the people who have the power to do that on the behalf of human beings, right? Human beings are not corporations. We can build corporations, we can own them, but we are people first, not corporations first. That's a different perspective, and that brings about a different outcome, right? So egalitarianism is the fundamental value that we are equal because we're human, and as a result of that, we are all entitled to equal rights, right? And if we believe that, then we have to do equity first in order to get to equality. And politics is the conversation or debate about power. power is important. Because in order to have a politics of humanity, we have to shift the power dynamics in a way that works for all of us, right? Education, again, is one of the ways that we get there. It's the process of systematically interacting with folks, students in particular, so they learn how society works. Or as John Henry Clark says, education is the preparation for power, to wield and hold power, right? And then power, based on Wade Noble's work, is the ability to define someone's reality and make them live according to that definition as though it is the definition of their own choosing, right? So the sky, what color is it? I use this all the time. Everyone would say it's blue. Well, who told you it's blue? Well, my parents. Well, who told your parents it's blue? Their parents. But who created the concept blue and said that's what we should call whatever it is we're seeing in the sky, right? Whomever did that, or whatever culture did that, now is defining that reality for everyone. Because when we look up there and we say blue, that culture defined that concept blue and now defines how we see the sky. Does that make sense? Cool? Okay. So, a politics of humanity is a path forward to equality as we have always kind of thought of it or used it in the popular political space, but human-centered politics shifts the power dynamic in a way that works for everyone, right? So I'm going to play something, and then we'll talk about how we make that culture shift. Yeah.
Charles Bell.
Oh, we have some more ancestors. Ashe. Charles Bell. Ashe.
Edna Bell.
Edna Bell. Ashe.
Ed Bell.
Ed Bell. Ashe.
William Bell.
William Bell. Ashe.
Mike Bell.
Mike Bell. Ashe.
Danielle Bell.
Danielle Bell. Ashe.
George Bell.
George Bell. Ashe.
Larry Baker Jr.
And Larry Baker Jr. Ashe. I'm going to play something and we'll continue the conversation.
Oh, Tommy Hubbard Sr.
And Tommy Hubbard Sr. Ashe. We have some more ancestors, Ashe. Caroline Woods, Ashe. Ashe, yo, for all the ancestors. So in order to establish a path forward for everyone, I think we have to begin to practice a politics of humanity. And one of the ways we begin to practice that politics of humanity is to really focus on a shift in our cultural values toward egalitarianism, right? It's really always depended on egalitarianism, has depended on how we defined the we and we the people, right? We talked a little earlier about whether or not that we was broad in terms of the founding fathers or very narrowly focused. And I think based on the way America has evolved since the Declaration of Independence and the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, it has really been a narrowly defined we. And it's time to broaden that to we to all of us, right? And then the phrase all men are created equal gets toward that egalitarian sensibility, all, but it's problematic because it's very patriarchal, right? All men. And given who was in the room where it happened, there literally were men and nobody else, right? So from a gender-based perspective, that's not inclusive, right? From a socioeconomic perspective, it's not inclusive because all of the men had means, right? And so even poor men who looked or had the ethnic makeup of the men in the room, right? White was still a relatively new construct, but European descendant men of means, European descendant men that did not have means were not in that room and may not and probably weren't considered in that we or all in the phrase all men are created equal. Neither were women and neither were people of color. Black people or African descendant people were enslaved at that time, and anybody else who was not European in terms of their ethnic descent was not considered, right? So it's problematic because all those folks, even though we're using inclusive language in that those documents, all these folks are not included in that all or in that we. So we have to redefine our cultural values to ensure that the all represents all of us and that the we is us. Does that make sense? So basically I'm arguing that in order to begin to practice a politics of humanity, we have to hold the language accountable, right? And the people who reify that language, hold them accountable so that they are absolutely representing the best of who we are so we can continue to grow and be our best, right? Optimizing not only our potential, but our agency. Yes?
Still not included.
Still not included. That's absolutely right. That's why I say we have to hold it accountable, the language, to the not just the letter, but the spirit of how we mean it now in the contemporary context and not necessarily contemporary for now and not the contemporary context in which it was created. All right, thank you for that. Shout out to Lavando. What's up, homie? In order to shift the culture toward egalitarianism as a fundamental principle of our society, we have to agree that all of us, including Black Lives Matter, simply because we exist, right? It's not an all versus us, meaning a subset. It's an all just because. And the reason why we have to make these subsets of folks, whether it's LGBTQ, whether it's one ethnic group over another, or even if it's like focusing on, socioeconomic issues that are not ideal, poverty. It's because we've created an environment in this country where those folks who occupy those less than desirable spaces don't matter, right? So in America, the biggest thing has been race, class, and gender. And if you don't fall in the ideal quote-unquote race, remember race is a construct, not an actual thing. It's a construct reinforced or reified by policies, practices, and procedures that make racism real. But race itself, not at all real. Racism is about power. Race is about just differentiating groups. But if you don't fall in one of those categories that is desired, then you don't matter when it comes to ethnic background. If you don't fall into one of those categories that is desired in terms of your gender, male, cisgendered male, particularly cisgendered white male, then you haven't historically mattered. If you don't fall into the class strata that has been preferred, right? Wealth. Now we have a lot of talk over the last 30 years about middle class. Then you don't matter. How do we create a society where none of that matters as much as our humanity and our collective humanity, right? We have to completely rethink the way we do work, the way we do education, the way we do the world, the way we do community, and make sure that that focus is on the value of our human beingness and not these external material aspects of value, right? So this idea that all of us matter because we're human has to be the guiding principle of a new America, right? How do we get there? We've got to activate trust. That's a big thing, right? We talked about trust a few weeks ago, but we have to activate the trust that comes from a deep relationship. That means we have to know each other. And the reason why we don't know each other in the way that gets us to this politics that brings each other in, a politics of humanity, is because there have been historically, forever and a day since this place became America, federal, state, and local legislation that keeps us apart. What is that? Redlining, as an example, right? Black codes, Jim Crow laws, all of these cultural and legal methods to keep people apart have created a disconnect, right? If I didn't grow up around you, whoever you may be, and I have been told that you, whoever you are, not the type of folks that my type of folks hang around, then when I see you and I have the opportunity to engage on a human level, I won't, because I have been socialized that you are other. You are not someone who people like me hang out with. And that could be anything, right? As an African American with a doctorate degree, it could be my education that keeps me from talking to somebody, right? I have a doctorate degree and I won't speak to people who don't. That's the dumbest thing I ever heard, right? But in America, we have defined that separation based on how we look and what we have, right? A true politics of humanity takes all of that stuff that keeps us divided out of the equation, and we engage based on our common humanity, right? We have to agree then that it is our differences that make us stronger and that our humanity is the most important thing that we have in common, right? And so that's the cultural part. The second part is education. How do we redefine education? It's not enough to agree that all people are created equal and should have equitable access to resources and opportunities. We can agree, and that would be great. If we don't put anything into place and practice to reinforce that belief or that agreement, then it means nothing. It's a platitude, which we're hearing a lot of these days, right? Equitable as opposed to equal, because we have to, again, correct the 400 years of inequality, inequitable access to resources, right? Inequitable ability to generate wealth, inequitable access to education, all of these things. We have to begin to create a society built on the principles that stem from our new egalitarian values. And first, we have to then establish a political framework. That is, we have to define exactly what our new America will be based on this agreement that our humanity brings us together, is what we have in common, right? That's why Dr. Wade Noble's idea of power and defining reality for ourselves and others, and educating others to live in that definition as if it's one or natural, like they chose it. That makes sense, right? It's the most natural thing ever. That's why that's important, and that's where education comes in. Once we have agreed on this new set of ideals that bring us together, then we need to educate future generations, because what we know from psychology is that if you've experienced a trauma for any number of years, it takes you at least that many years, once you start working on it, working on healing, to fully heal and move on from that. So if you're thinking about the American construct, that's 400 years. 1619 is when the first enslaved Africans were brought to this continent, right? And since then, we have been out of balance. And so this is work that we need to start now, but it's also work that the outcomes won't be seen by our generation, right? We lay the groundwork, we educate the next generations so they continue that work and fully realize an America built on a politics of humanity, right? Um, how do we do that? Through education. Well, first, we have to be honest about American history. And we have to create education, not just curricula, but a path to education in terms of actually being educated that is equitable across economic strata, across ethnic strata, across the states, like states' rights, all that kind of stuff. That makes sense. I get that. Cool. But we have to agree at the national level that our children need to know who we have been so they can have context for who we are and then create who we will be in the future. Right? That has to be agreed upon regardless of states' rights, federalism, all of that kind of stuff. We just have to do it because it must be done. Right? Once we are teaching the truth of who we have been to give that context and tools for the future, then we also have to be truthful about who America has been in world history and the world history that happened before the rise of Europe. So there's context that is beyond just the ugly nature of American history, right? There were people existing on the planet before there was a United States, and there were successful societies before there was a Europe, right? And having a holistic understanding of human history means that we can better see each other for who we are and have been, right? And then, you know, we have to really focus on creating healthy, happy, and whole human beings, not just STEM. STEAM, as an example, incorporates the arts and brings in other elements of humanity. But if we're only focusing on the ones and twos or the zeros and ones, then we're not dealing with, you know, the humanities, the things that really bind us, right? You can be a great mathematician, but if you don't know how to talk to people, what use are you to the culture, as an example? Same with a musician or anybody else. We have to understand that even if we start today again, it's a process, right? So starting today means that we are just working out what we believe, right? We have this politics of humanity as a goal, and we have to figure out what that means for all of us. We don't have to agree 100% on everything, but we have to agree that we are human beings, and because we're human beings, we need to value each other. And how that shapes out is the conversation that we need to have right now. Right? And then again, we lay the groundwork and the foundation for subsequent generations to go. And then we get to value. The value proposition is really important because once we have all of this in place, then it's almost like Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. I'm a Trekkie. You never ever see people go down to the common area where they're eating and pull out money to pay for food, right? In the Star Trek world, food is a foregone conclusion, right? You never see anybody buying clothes. It's a foregone conclusion. People have their basic needs met. And because their basic needs are met, their primary focus is adding value to society. So we'll talk about that more after I play something else. All right. So, a politics of humanity is a politics that optimizes our potential and allows us to use that potential to add value to the community to make it better, right? Our focus is not on our personal, individual, material gain. It is on the community, right? That doesn't mean you don't have the ability to have wealth. It means that you are able to gain wealth in a capitalist society with the mindset that your wealth is for you and the community, right? It's your responsibility when you have means to make sure other people have the opportunity and the access to means. Does that make sense? So when we finally have realized the politics of humanity, our society can truly be egalitarian because we will have created a culture from which politics, policies, practices, and procedures will be human-centered and in balance with the planet, right? So none of our, ways to gain or create wealth or generate resources are out of balance with the planet. So global warming goes away, all of these things, right? Because we're smarter than that. We will no longer need to declare Black Lives Matter because everyone will be taught the value of all life and will know their own value because of how society treats them, right? There won't be poverty because we wouldn't want to put people through the pain and the trauma of poverty because they're human beings. We value them, right? There's no stress about accessing basic needs like health care, high quality education at every level, and housing, and all the other things that are basic needs, because as a society, we value each other and we make sure that there is access to those things because we all need those things, right? When you shift the value proposition from the acquisition of resources at the expense of others to ensuring that everyone has what they need, so the value add is who they are to the community, then there's no reason to exploit people and ensure people don't have what they need, right? You make sure they have what they need because the value is who they are, period, point blank, their humanity, and not the currency or whatever the form of exchange is, right? Again, there's no exploitation because our notions of wealth will have shifted, right? And this is not new. I'm not making this up. This is how much of Africa worked before colonialism and European slavery, right? Even today, there are groups of people on the continent where after a young person has, become an adult through rites of passage, the community builds them a home. So that person is not homeless. And that home is built on a plot of land that person will cultivate. And the excess resources cultivated from that plot of land is shared with the community. So there's no hunger, right? And as we understand poverty, it doesn't exist because the community provides for itself, right? And by all American standards, these communities would be considered poor, and yet everyone has what they need. So how is it that a community that doesn't even know what a dollar is, or a euro, or a pound, or whatever, right, a crown, they don't know what that form of exchange is, but there is no poverty in that community? How is it that they can figure that out and we haven't figured that out? It's because the value proposition, the way they think about each other and society, is completely different from how we have been socialized to think about each other here, right? In America, because of slavery, because of racism, because of sexism, classism, genderism, all these isms, we have learned to think of each other as others, as people who are not us. Therefore, we don't have to provide for them because we're providing for our individual selves and our families. In those other communities that I mentioned, I am because we are, and because we are, I am. So if I am, and I know that I get hungry, I know that we get hungry. Therefore, if I have something to feed myself, I should make sure I have something to feed us. Right? If I'm growing food on my plot of land and I can't eat all of it, instead of letting it go to waste, I share with my neighbor. Basic idea, right? But again, in America, Toni Morrison, before she passed, a great ancestor, said that when she was growing up in Lorain, Ohio in the 30s and 40s, the conversation was about being good neighbors, right? And then it shifted from neighbor to citizen. And then it shifted from citizen to taxpayer, from taxpayer to consumer, from consumer to shareholder. From neighbor to shareholder, you go from adding value to extracting value, right? So since the 30s, what is that? I don't know, 70, 80 years, we have seen our concept of what it is to be a good American shift from being neighborly and providing for each other for the common good, even through all of the issues of the civil rights movement. We still had a sense of what it meant to be a neighbor and a member of community. But now it's shareholder. I'm going to extract resources. Totally different constructs of how to build a society, right? A politics of humanity ensures that we are all better because we are all working to be better together, right? That is how we build a new America, and it's up to us to do that work, and there's no better time than now to start. The question then is, okay, that sounds great. What do we do, right? That is the harder question, obviously, and we don't have time to really go deep into that, but I will outline that next week in terms of my thoughts. The other part of that, though, is I think it's a little dangerous to overly prescribe how to develop this politics of humanity, because in the same way that I don't want to tell my piano player what to do, I don't want to infringe upon how you, and by you, all of us, can add the best of who we are to make this thing work, right? We live in a country where we have been educated in a way that's antithetical to the narrative. The narrative is American exceptionalism, but our education says you fall in line, you become a cog in the wheel, and you make the economy go, right? This is not about making economies go. This is about accepting the best of who we are and being truly exceptional, right? And if we are doing that work and we agree to engage everybody in our best selves, through our best selves, then I honestly think that the paths forwards begin to lay themselves out for us, right? It's going to be different in every community, but those overarching ideals are going to be the guiding points, right? Those are the things that we have to hold on to. I'm doing my work for you. And if you value that, then there's a form of exchange, right? Content, resources, content, as an example, right? I don't have a problem with capitalism in that sense, right? I have a problem with the exploitative nature of capitalism as it has come to kind of be practiced in the modern sense. But the first thing I would offer, not to, again, be overly prescriptive, is just to begin to think about ways in which we can build community around what brings us together or what we have in common, which is our humanity, right? Those of us who are parents, we all want our children to be better than we are. We all want our children to have great educations. We all want our children to have great lives. Those are common things that we can build around, right? No matter what you look like, no matter how much money you have, no matter, all of those things that we can readily identify as differentiators. Begin to think about that and look for resources. Google is your friend on how to build community and how to join communities that are already thinking along these lines, right? So, a politics of humanity. I'll talk to you next week. We're going to play you out. Have a great weekend.